Thank you guys for coming, and thank you, Brad, for coming as well. It's Ben's show, so of course he's here, Ben Werther. And on the occasion of this solo show that is closing tomorrow, Townworld, where Ben collaged together photographs from yearbooks from the town he grew up in, Nashville, Tennessee, with model train catalog images. So all of the images in the paintings are scans for either yearbooks from around the year 2000 and model train catalogs, which are these catalogs where you can order accessories and trains for your model train set. It's like a hobbyist pastime. And then there are all these different methods: scanning, printing, monotyping, sanding that Ben uses. He's been developing these processes over the last few series, and then we'll get more into like kind of the conceptual background through the talk. But so Ben, he's from Nashville and went to Cooper Union. Brad Phillips, he's an author, he's an artist, and he's Canadian, but he really likes America, so he's allowed to be here. And that's our intro. So for the talk, I'll just be asking questions, and you guys can speak as freely as you'd like. I guess my first question is into it immediately. Are you referencing collective memory in your work? Do you think it's more effective to be specific or to be general in your references?
Well, thank you everyone for coming. All of you beautiful people. Well, that's there's two questions in there, right?
Yeah.
Collective memory versus, can you repeat the second part?
Yeah, whether it's more effective for the audience, or in your opinion, for your references to be general or specific. So like specific being personal and like general being about a shared experience.
Well, I would say with these paintings that there's a little bit of both. I guess where like the images of the miniature are extremely general and non-specific, and they, I guess, feel familiar in that sense. Like a place that maybe you recognize or you have been to, or you have a sort of some preconceived notion of. And then the yearbook stuff I think is familiar as well, but I guess for me, one of the things that was important in kind of combining these two genres of imagery was that the yearbooks have a similar aesthetic quality to them, but they are extremely specific and local because they're, talking about Nashville or high schools that are there and people who live there. So they're sort of like the opposite of the miniature in that sense, if that makes sense. Like, whereas like you have this image that's very general and an approximation of a place, and then you have something that's like very literal and specific to it. I would say that with these, I'm kind of resisting one or the other. And as far as like the way you phrase that question of like, am I referencing general over specific? They're doing kind of both, and that's what I was interested in exploring with them, is like looking at the space between the two, like this idea, which is, the theme of the talk, which is like myth versus history, whereas like the miniatures would be the sort of mythic content, whereas the yearbook imagery would be a more like historical primary source almost, and then merging the two as a way to kind of create a kind of new historical narrative that's abstract but also maybe something else. And that's important to me with this work and also other things that I've made recently.
I like the way you're writing, like it's like we got a date or something. I feel like, but the question is like, what's helpful to the audience? And I guess also is like, do you want to help the audience? Is also kind of part of it. The idea of being helpful is not that interesting to me. But I like the idea of referencing things that are part of everyone's common experience, like movies and television and like cliches, because everyone has an entrance point. And I think that's what's interesting for me in making art is I don't have anything in common with the people that are looking at my work except growing up in a kind of American, for me like Canada is sort of like America, Trump would love that. So yeah, like I'd like to reference things that are common to everyone's experience. There's like there's a language and a vocabulary that everybody's working with going into it. That's my answer.
You mentioned something about like primary sources. Or how are you differentiating that in your work, and is that something that you think about when you're writing? Like, because I guess with the writing, it's like you're combining things that actually happen to you and then kind of making them more exaggerative.
I mean, the primary source is just your consciousness, in a way with writing, but also there's the assumption that I'm writing about stuff that actually happened to me, and that's like basically what we're talking about. Is it's weird that if you write in the first person now, people sort of just assume that it's autobiographical, but
sounds like a cop out, like you're trying to pretend it's
not, yeah, a bit of both, but like I don't know. The history of fiction is people writing in the first person, and I don't know that everyone was always assuming that what people wrote was personal and diaristic, but these people really seem to believe that now. It's hard to write something in the first person and have people suspend disbelief and let it be a story instead of like a confession,
One of the things about what you're talking about, and also just like knowing your writing and also knowing me personally, is like I feel like being able to construct that kind of plausible deniability is very appealing to an anxious mind,
right?
Which is part of the reason why I think I have some of the sensibilities that I do, as far as this conversation that we're having with creating this sort of something that doesn't differentiate between like something real and something not. You kind of have this control to project maybe like personal fantasy.
For me, it's just that my mom's still alive, so I want to be able to make it appear that maybe not everything is true. So you write things that are half true, and then I write things that are half, to me, like clearly fictional, and then it allows everything to potentially be fictional, and for my mother to be able to sleep at night.
Yeah, no, I have a nightmare where like everyone finds my diary at Tompkins Square Park, and it's just everything I've ever said or thought about everyone. And it just like becomes, oh my god, it's such a nightmare.
But you can bolster it. If you can just be like, well, that's just like artwork that I've made, that's not.
Yeah, and then move down.
It's art.
Be famous.
Yeah.
But I feel like this like obsession with things being real or not real is newish. I don't know if that's true. And with like, I feel like it coincides with social media and everyone sort of being confessional or presenting their lives as product or material.
Can you elaborate on be a bit more specific on what you mean you're talking about? Like maybe an example of something like that.
I mean, I can only say that in the past, maybe 20 years ago, if someone asked me questions, it wasn't about, is this real? Did this actually happen to you? Is this a painting that's an image of something from your life, or is it from your imagination? And now that seems to be like almost the first question always. Is this story a true story? Instead of, is this story a good story?
That reminds me about like people who are like, you're not from Nashville.
Oh yeah.
Which is like, why would you question where I'm from, ever? I'm telling you where I'm from.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that. Okay, to elaborate on that, I think that there is, I actually had a conversation with ChatGPT about this.
With who?
With ChatGPT. You know what that is, Ricky?
He's like,
You
no.
need to calm down.
Porn site?
Yes.
It's about to be. No, there was I feel like there are certain trends, I'm a big fan of, I don't want to get into I'm not as big of a fan as maybe some of the other people in the audience maybe, but someone like Lana Del Rey, who very much mythologizes America and the sort of aesthetic of America that's kind of misremembering the past. This type of aesthetic I think is very appealing to people because I think I like the whole idea of working at Waffle House or something like that. I think for certain demographics signifies a more authentic experience of the world, whereas you're removed from a place like New York City or LA or just city centers, and where most of the art is being produced, if we're being realistic about it. And I think that there's a sort of fetishistic quality to some of that material for people that can be problematic, but also I think for certain people is a sort of it represents a level of trying to pick my words wisely here. Yeah, I think it just signifies, that's why I was saying ChatGPT earlier, because I asked ChatGPT, why do people love images of the American South or just Americana, or stuff like Lana Del Rey or Ethel Kane in general, this very mythologized idea of the rural area that I have noticed with your question, a lot of people in New York really like that vibe of you see lots of people wearing real tree camo at places like Finelli's and stuff like that. And it's I love camouflage.
But you actually love camouflage, the history of camouflage.
Yeah, I love some tarn, stuff like this.
What's that?
I don't really want to get into that too much, but
Maybe we should pivot. Okay, so I think maybe this is something interesting to talk about. I wrote this question, how do you consider authenticity and constructed reality in your work, and if those things kind of coexist, or if it ever, the way that you're constructing reality ever infringes on authenticity. Maybe Brad, you have some ideas about that.
It's confusing. The question's
I don't know. Okay, then how about we skip it? Do you ever make work about a specific person and get worried that they'll see it?
Yeah, I've done that, and then I've regretted it.
what happened?
I made paintings of people that I was in love with, and then we broke up, and then I sort of felt bad that these images were out there. I felt like I wasn't responsible. That's a really honest answer. Or I wrote about my mom, and then started to worry that my mom would read what I wrote. It's just the compulsion to be personal. Sometimes personal material is really compelling, and it's the stuff that I would have the most feeling and emotion about, and that I could probably do the most with. But then there's repercussions for other people who know me or who are in my orbit, and they're not necessarily agreeing to deal with the same vulnerability that I am. Yeah, I made paintings of exes, and I feel bad about it. And
Sorry to.
I wrote about my mom.
I know.
I don't know, it's difficult.
Would you ever just change the name?
Yeah, I've done that.
Does that work?
Not really.
It doesn't work.
No.
I hate when people suggest that.
No.
They're still going to know that it's about them. It's a very explicit and honest thing.
That thing at the beginning of books that says, if this sounds like a real person, it's a coincidence. It's bullshit. It's a legal, it's a way to get out of being in trouble or getting sued for libel.
Yeah.
Everybody knows, but I don't know. It's hard. things that are personal are compelling, but it's more complicated after they're kind of out in public.
It's compelling because it's the easiest way to make like kind of a complete narrative. Like when you start making something up, then you have like all of these weird plot holes that you have to fill, and you like end up like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just easier, I guess, to be
And I
honest.
just feel more strongly about things that I've really experienced. So I want to use that as material.
And you don't want to orphan like things, and you don't want to forget that you like made something up and have to go back.
Yeah.
Is that why, Ben, you don't have the, like, you can't really identify the people in the paintings? Or why can't you identify the people in the paintings?
No, I know. I mean, there isn't the green one in the front, but, I guess I really like anonymity in artwork that has to do with something that's like really specific, I guess. Like I did the same thing with the work that I made about Milsim and like the airsoft LARPing. Where
That was out of respect for them?
Yeah, it was, but also somehow it made them feel more real to not have their faces in it.
Did you ask their permission to use their images?
Have you been exposed?
No. I mean, it's some, yeah, but it wasn't, that wasn't like, I wasn't like,
Yeah.
can I use that photo? Like, it wasn't like that. It was like, it was, the way that I made that was
Free selfie.
yeah, I wasn't like putting cameras in people's faces when I was making that work.
Do you want to briefly tell everyone what Milsim refers to?
Yeah, so the show that I did before this was a photo documentary project, maybe more of a mockumentary that I made about the subculture of Milsim, which stands for military simulation. And basically what it is it's people who use airsoft guns, which are basically like a really low-level BB gun that shoots like little plastic pellets. And it's mostly people who are combining that sort of like paintball meets military collecting. So people are really invested in creating this sort of like sense of historical accuracy that's more of an aesthetic exercise than maybe like being critical of a certain historical narrative or political narrative. So you have people who are, you know, impersonating something like the KSK, which would be like a German special forces, but they're in, you know, rural Indiana doing that, and you know, doing it would be considered LARPing or live action role play, and that's something that I'm interested in personally, and also I just really wanted to photograph that. And so I went and just spent a bunch of time with these people and photographed them, and the images that I produced from that show were sort of the ones that I ended up choosing were the ones where the faces were a bit more obscured, not in the like pixelated like operator photo idea, but like in more of like a just the way that like the shadows would hit people so you couldn't see their face. Maybe it's because it's like, I feel like with certain video games, like some of the characters feel anonymous as well to me. Like even though you do know who they are, they do feel like that sort of like POV quality of like a video game that feels like you know it's you, but it also feels anonymous, and there's this sort of like weird relationship that you have to like seeing yourself like in the setting that I think is interesting, maybe. I haven't really thought about like why specifically, I guess, a whole lot. I think it just like works better for me to have it be like, maybe it's because it becomes more about like it being a formal concern than like about like being like specific to a specific person. And I
Yeah,
think
it's not a portrait.
yeah, when you remove their if you remove someone's face from an image, then it becomes more about like the image formally than it does about like the subject, I think. Which with that imagery from Milsim, I was more interested in the sort of like it as an aesthetic exercise rather than the nuance of the people participating. And whereas with this, I think it's a similar, like I'm more interested in this cow costume. And this painting actually depicts my high school that I went. These guys are standing in the back lot behind my high school. But
Both of the images are from the same.
yeah, and I'm more interested in like in what the formal qualities of the images, and like this being this kind of like simulation of a cow, like a barnyard animal type thing, and less than like seeing their faces and imagining their narrative. Like I'm more interested in it formally and aesthetically than as in bringing like that.
That's like what makes it a painting is the form of the object and not what it is.
Yeah, and the parking notes are like that too, like the other work that I made is like it's anonymous work inherently, which is also part of it, and why I think why maybe people found that interesting.
What are you writing?
I'm not going to tell you, it's embarrassing. So, what is something about your practice you think that people are misunderstanding or romanticizing, or both or neither?
Every time someone writes about my paintings, they say I'm a photorealist painter. That really bugs me. Because I'm not.
Stolen valor.
Stolen valor, yeah. I just don't really understand it. I don't even really understand where people see that. Which I guess is interesting, because it feels like so far removed from my intentions, but it's kind of an annoyance to me, because it comes up all the time. And I look at my paintings, they're not that realistic. They're not. And the concerns of photorealist painters are like not the same.
Well, are they saying that because they're based off of images?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's pretty, like in a reductive way, yeah. They look realistic. I don't want to be associated.
How would you describe them instead?
I don't know.
You
Which is
would.
probably a problem. I should know.
You would describe
I should
it.
know.
Yeah.
Just like killer paintings.
They're lit paintings.
They're super good paintings.
What do you think people are romanticizing about your work?
I mean, that's probably also my fault. Everything is my fault when it comes down to it.
You are kind of asking.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like the hard living artist. Because I wrote about being a hard living artist, I guess. I don't ever like being tied to a thing for too long, or at all. So I guess, yeah, it's like there's a romantic kind of notion of like, because it fits into lots of art history and the history of writing and stuff, of being like, you know, a guy who likes to get fucked up and write nice sentences, I guess, which I was that guy though. So it's confusing to me. I don't ever really want to be associated with myself, because I find myself exhausted.
Don't perceive me.
Yeah. Like it's a nightmare in here. Yeah. I don't want to be tied to it too much.
Yeah. Do you have something about your work that people misunderstand?
I feel like this question's better suited to Brad because
Let me
no, because your work is more biographical,
Yeah.
allegedly. Whereas like this, I think is the most biographical work that I've made for me. So I don't know that I'm someone who's being perceived in that way.
What if even people thought you were like the artist of the South, the working class car art artist? Like,
Yeah, that would be really whack. Yeah, no, I don't, I guess that's not,
You don't think that there's anything that, not knowing anything about you and seeing your work, people would jump to conclusions that aren't true?
well, I mean, that's always going to happen. Like anytime you do anything in public, people are going to make an assumption about you and you can't control that. As far as like things that I would be really bothered by though, that would be, you know, worth like being upset about,
No.
I don't know though. I do want to make, like, I honestly do want to make less work that feels like
America.
You know, because like I am interested in that, but I do want to make, actually some of the newer work that I'm making has to do with France. So, it
Have
really
you been
does-
to France?
I actually have, yeah. I think for me, like the fixation on America is like, because I talked to Adam about this the other day for the review. It's like this question of like patriotism, which is not really something that I'm really interested in my work. It's more like, I was actually talking to you earlier about this, like the sort of like idea of like historical drama or like historical iconography. That's interesting to me. So like
Have you seen Bridgerton?
no, I haven't, but I was actually gonna say, like, I love Pride and Prejudice, like this movie that,
Yeah.
or stuff like, or like Marie Antoinette, like I really am interested in those types of like historical dramas. And to me, that stuff is related to this work, and that's something that maybe I haven't expanded upon enough in my work that I would like to, that I think is, like, looking at this, something like this, that's overly stereotypical and maybe looking at a kind of historical stereotype of a place is something that I'm interested in doing, and I just want to expand beyond like it just being like it's sort of like specific America perception. Like with the Milsim work that I was talking about earlier, like I think looking back on that project, like the most interesting examples or types of people that I was photographing were people who were doing impressions of things from other countries like Russia or Germany or the Philippines, who were like fixated on a specific group outside of the one that they're in.
Maybe you're also just too young to already be tied to a thing or misunderstood in that way. No offense.
No, that's kind of what I'm trying to say. Like I'm not the guy as far as like that question at this point.
Brad, do you think of like America as like material
Yeah.
for your work?
Yeah, it's the best. Yeah.
Why? Is it because America and Canada are similar?
I think so, because I was like such a latchkey kid, so I just watched TV and movies, and everything was American media, because Canadian TV is like about like fucking pioneers and stuff. But also, Canada has this attitude of like being very insecure and neurotic in relation to America, but also feeling really superior, which is interesting. But I just grew up with this country was sort of like a big TV show, because America was the show that I was watching all the time from a safe distance. And because I didn't have a normal family or TV just stood in for my family, like everything was about television and movies. And that's how I learned how to be in the world. And all those TV shows and movies were American. So everything that I think about is kind of informed by American media.
Like
Which I love.
Cowboys and Indians.
Cowboys and Indians, yeah.
Yeah, that's the asshole of America.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Racism?
Okay. So, maybe we switch a little bit to more about process. Your obsession, Beth, with like analog processes, scanning, printing, models. Do you feel like having that kind of analog element of your work makes the studio experience more interesting, or creates like immediacy or intimacy in the studio, or it's something else that intrigues you?
I don't know, I mean, it depends on like which.
Body of work.
Yeah, I with this specifically, because this is, you know, what we're talking about. I think, I mean, I enjoy the materiality of paint, I think, as any painter would. And that's something I enjoy. I love mixing color. And I pretty meticulously collect all of the color swatches that I mix, and I hold on to them because I like having them and looking at them. I like process-based marks, and I like weathered surfaces, and stuff like that, because I think for me, I think my intention in representing, like, I guess, representations of decay, which, like, specifically what I would mean is, like, I think in the press release, the example we used was like a tree that's been carved over with people's names. And like, I think that becomes an image of decay, but it also has a sort of like mythic quality to it. And with decay specifically, that is what is most interesting. And that's oftentimes why I pursue that type of texture or like with the string in the painting. And how that came about was from sanding the paintings.
So basically these marks here with throughout all the paintings have them, these kind of weathered marks. Ben would tape string to the wall of his studio, like he would call them these drawings, I guess, made of string, and then lay canvas over the string, and then he would take a sander and sand the surface of the painting, and these marks come through to the surface. If you know about his parking note series.
Yeah, but initially I was
Like,
just gluing them. Initially, when I began developing the paintings, I just began by gluing the images directly to the canvas and sanding them to make them smooth, but to also like add this
Make them look old.
Yeah. And I just decided, like, throughout the process that I wanted to have a bit more control over that action and not just be kind of like blindly making a mess. So that's how the sort of thinking about like how to make this sort of like weathering process into something that's intentional, and I guess the term would be drawerly.
No, that's a good word.
Yeah.
What does
Say
that mean to you,
Scrabble.
Brad?
Drawerly?
Yeah.
That's a $50 word. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, honestly, I'm not the most processed dude, which Jacob pointed out to me.
Jacob is, we work together and we've been in Brad's studio.
I was always just like that. I was only ever really just interested in the end result. And I feel like it's only since you came by a couple of years ago, I started thinking more. I was like, oh, this is actually fun while I'm doing it. Painting is fun, it can be fun. But I never really thought about it much, which maybe I should have.
You were thinking more about like replicating an image than
Yeah. And same with writing, like it's not, the process of writing is never really that enjoyable.
it's so painful.
Yeah, it's brutal.
The most uncomfortable thing you've ever done in my life.
Yeah. But since I started to, it's been more interesting lately, painting. Yeah. To not be so concerned with where I'm getting to, like the end result. Yeah.
How do you balance like having your writing practice and your painting practice?
I don't know, people ask that one a lot. It just feels like some idea is suited to writing and some ideas are suited to being an image, and it's just like an intuitive thing.
I more mean like in the studio, like being the person making both things. Like, how do you compartmentalize them?
It's frustrating, it's difficult,
Yeah.
Because I feel like maybe neither gets my full attention.
Yeah. What can you do?
I don't know. This is a question to think about.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, you're a writer.
Not like even comparable level here.
You said,
But I enjoy
drawerly?
I use the term. Yeah, no, but I mean, it's not even like remotely on the same level. But I enjoy writing, and I love writing and reading. But I do like writing.
But you're mostly writing narratives to go with your work.
Yeah, I do spend a lot of. I mean, I love to make like zines about stuff that I make, and I just do it for myself, so I can see ideas, and I like to write short stories, but I don't really share that stuff. I more keep it to myself. And with the MilSim project, the last project that I did, the writing was a big part of that for me. and I borrowed a lot from the sort of tradition of cosmic horror and people like H.P. Lovecraft or Thomas Ligotti. And
Cosmic horror?
Yes, and taking influence from those guys as far as like writing a sort of like fantasy narrative around this thing that's both fantasy and also hyper-political, whereas like that stuff is deeply pessimistic, but also is very much a fantasy narrative. And that type of writing, I think, was very influential for me as well, with their sort of like making words and stuff like that and using them in their writing. I really enjoy that. I mean, yeah, I would say Thomas Ligotti's writing was specifically his book Teatro Grottesco was very influential to this show as well. I actually thought this painting in the back is titled after
The
his,
black one?
yeah, his story Gas Station Carnivals, which I would highly recommend to everyone here.
What's it called?
Gas Station Carnivals.
Because that painting in the back is called Gas Station Laundromat.
Yeah. He also has a story called The Small People. What's it called again? The Small People. Yes. That I would also recommend if you enjoyed miniatures and artwork about miniatures. These are
Who doesn't enjoy artwork about miniatures?
Yeah, it's really good though. That writing, I think a lot of people don't talk about it, but it's been very influential to me personally. He is more known for his just absolutely turbo pessimism. Like the character of Rust Gold in True Detective is actually based on his book Conspiracy Against the Human Race, which I'm actually not a huge fan of that. Personally, I'm not an antinatalist, but his fiction that he writes, I'm a big fan of.
I'll say I've rarely met a person as passionate about art and stuff as Ben. Like he's always fucking talking about this stuff. It's very nice. It's very rare. It's the real deal.
That is a real
Thanks.
Yeah.
artist.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. How do you guys balance sincerity and irony in your work? I mean, earlier Brad said, I hate irony.
Yeah, I just don't like irony. I don't ever think that I use any irony. So that's me on that question. Everything's sincere.
Everything is sincere.
Yeah.
For you.
For me, yes.
Yeah.
I know you guys like to be ironic.
You guys as in,
No.
Yeah, no, it's like a very, it's such a Gen Z, but I feel like we definitely like try to take things that are ironic and then like push them to their limit, what is the term, like meta irony?
irony about irony.
Yeah, like I talked about this yesterday with those guys that were coming over here, where like that new social media that's like basically just the reconstruction of MySpace. And
That sounds fun.
It looks exactly like MySpace.
I would use that.
Yeah, but why though? Why? No, seriously, like why would you use it? What's the appeal
Because
for
it's like
you?
gimmicky, or because I mean, it reminds me of Tumblr or something.
It's nostalgia.
Yeah. But I guess like some of that does to me. Maybe I mistake things that are nostalgic for ironic. But I think there's something about.
I don't think nostalgia and irony are the same thing.
No, but with something like that, I mean, I'm trying to think how to like explain what I mean.
Would you use the new MySpace?
I'm just not really like a big social media person, so my opinion on that would be biased. But
So no.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think it's cool, which I think would be enough of an endorsement, right?
Yeah, that's enough.
But yeah, but like I don't know. I don't know. I think people are like worried that they don't have that their experience of the world isn't authentic, and that because of a variety of different factors, or they don't it's too like they don't want to try. Like they don't want to try to own a home because they know that they won't be able to own a home, so they fall back on irony or like idea of the past as a way to sort of like cope with that. Like I feel like it's like millennials would be, I was saying this the other day too, it's like millennials would be like unemployed and be like, damn, it sucks to be unemployed. But like Gen Z will be like unemployed and then make unemployment into like a niche subculture that's like passionate. And they can do all this aesthetic exercise around it. And like being a NEAT, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like that's like ironic, but maybe irony isn't the right word for that. But that I feel like that kind of like cultural exercise comes from a place of despair and fear around like being like having a genuine experience of the world and like needing to be propped up on this kind of like mythic construction. That is ironic, but is also sort of like leaning into something and taking it to an extreme.
Does anyone have any questions?
I do.
Ricky, what's your question?
What's this all about? This is so homoerotic. The barn door is wide open. The udders, it's like, you know, fellatio, and then the big silo, and then the painting the gonad up here.
What's
But
this all
also,
about?
what's the whole deal with the colors? Is everything a different color?
Yeah, everything. I like that interpretation, but
I've been looking at it, you know, for half an hour.
I can't stop seeing it now.
yeah, I like
The barn door wide open is really.
Okay, Ricky. Anyone else have any questions? Nick?
Could you actually talk a little bit more of like the culture, this sort of cultural production out of like this sort of fear-based cultural production or like this despair-based cultural production that you talked about? Answering the last question was really interesting. Maybe go more into detail about that.
Well,
Or like this new irony that I think you're playing, it actually like it's a big theme in your work. Like you're kind of exploring like this sort of meta production capacity.
yeah, I think that
It's very contemporary.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that, yeah, I mean, that's sort of why we wanted to theme this discussion off of that, this sort of like myth and memory, or like myth versus history, which is a broad conversation, but also like the intention behind that, or like the intention behind the sort of like recursive or overly intentionally recursive culture, where like all the movies that are made are remakes, all the songs are based on songs from the past, all fashion is just a reference to something else, and it's gotten to a point where like people in, I don't want to overgeneralize, so I might just go ahead and say Gen Z, and I don't mean that in like some ageist exclusionary sense. I'm just saying, yeah.
Yeah.
Like oftentimes I do think.
After 95.
How about this? For me personally, my own personal cultural taste, I often find myself more interested in things that are referential than things that are novel and new. Like I'm more interested in something like, and again, just me personally, I'm more interested in the aesthetics of something like Vaporwave than I am in like some person that's trying to make some really weird sounding industrial song that doesn't sound like anything I've ever heard. Like I like the reference, and I like the sort of nostalgia of it, and I think it goes beyond just like, because when you say nostalgia, at least when I think of nostalgia, I think of like the scene in Ratatouille with the guy at the end where he eats the pasta and he like sees his mom.
Oh, please.
That's what
I think about the mamas and the pampas.
That's generational, but
That's my stepdad's favorite movie.
it's a good movie. But that's because I use the term nostalgia a lot, and that's not really what I mean. I think it is, like you're asking, Nick, like it is something that I think for maybe younger generations comes from a place of despair about the future or the lack thereof, or this sort of like, I mean, this is like what Mark Fisher wrote about as well, with the slow cancellation of the future, and how that comes about through, everything basically being consumed and pushed towards like subscription-based consumerism, where you don't own anything, you can't own a home, and all this, you can't have kids.
I'm having kids for sure.
That's good. That's very optimistic. Not a lot of people feel that way. In fact, birth rates are insanely low because people are very pessimistic about the future on a very large scale. And so when I think I'm being a doomer, but to illustrate my point about like, you know, the Ratatouille nostalgia versus like what I mean when I say nostalgia is like a very different thing, because I think this as a sort of like cultural concern is not coming from like maybe a positive place, I would say. If that makes sense.
There are a couple more questions for you.
Yeah. I'm curious about how much do you feel like you kind of grab some of these modernist strategies that are from the past. Part of what I see you doing in this is the thing that, okay, it's not as reductive as we thought it was. Like, this is authentic, but it's not as kind of essentializing as maybe we thought. We can pull those strategies back. How much do you feel like you have to do to those strategies to make them contemporary? Because these are pretty, like, I'm thinking Rauschenberg, I'm thinking Motherwell, stuff like that. How much of that is, can you just lift and say, hey, we misunderstood what they were doing?
Well, I would say that I hope this is an answer to your question. I would say with abstract expressionism specifically, that would be almost like an inversion of this, because they were sort of trying to create images that were novel, that were interesting because they were novel as a reaction to World War II. At least that's my understanding of someone like Jackson Pollock, who is in that canon that you just described, but maybe less related to this work formally. Whereas like he's creating images that look new, that look like nothing anyone has ever seen before, and that becomes the appeal. Whereas what I was kind of describing earlier, I would say people they think they're interested in that, but they really wouldn't care if someone, and then maybe that's my own pessimism. I know I have friends who disagree with that, but like I do think that like if you were just to make some painting that just looks like totally new, that isn't like essentializing, I don't know that would have the same effect. Like I don't know how interesting that would be to me personally. Like to see this sort of like idea of novelty, like formal novelty, in the way that they were pursuing it. I mean, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, but I'm interested in abstract expressionism and what they were trying to do, and this kind of idea of like the new abstraction after the nuke or war, or this sort of like instance of violence and needing to reassess and look at the way that like history can be represented, and the surrealists were the same, and this work is maybe even more related to what they were trying to do, like as far as like the lineage of the miniature in art history. But like thinking about abstraction and what abstraction can be, and I think for me, in my head at least, which is maybe something that's just for me, as the person making these, I do think of them as abstractions, but rather than being this sort of like formal abstraction in the sense of like a Motherwell, I would say that it's more of like a contextual abstraction where it's looking at a historical narrative and manipulating it in the way that imagery on Tumblr might look at 2014 and then create a sort of like fisheye lens, deep fried, oversaturated image of like, this is what it was like when we were sitting in the park having Monster Energy listening to Tyler the Creator. But like the reality is that that's not what things were like, and so that type of imagery exists as this kind of like new abstraction that I think can be related to a post-war concern as far as like abstract expressionist and like needing to pursue like novelty.
I'm going to take two more questions.
Matisse.
Love that. Yeah.
When I walked
Not from you, Ricky.
when I walked into the gallery, and I said, it just feels like Matisse.
Ian, what's your question?
Cut out the color.
Shouts out, Ricky. Remind me which the, I guess, subtitle was Myth and what else about the song?
Myth and memory.
Myth and memory, yeah. So I feel like, a lot of thoughts about America. I feel like, for me, it comes up that there's a lot of situations, experiences, especially in New York City, that like, you go through and you're like, this can only happen here because of the context and because of everyone in their own individual lives coming here however they came and however their ancestors came and whatnot. And, I forgot someone was asking a question, but it was talking about, or bringing up thoughts about like continuity and becoming. And I feel like America as a country and as like an identity is always something that's like in that state, even like having to do with like becoming an independent sovereign nation. separating from the British. It requires some amount of fantasy to like be like, what does it mean to be American? And I feel like that's something that's like we're still doing, and it has to do with this like always going back and forth on like, well, we like that part, but we didn't like that part, but what does it mean to have a family? Do we want families? What should they look like? And like, you know, other people were mentioning the different artists that this may resemble, but I was wondering for you two, like, do you find yourselves like in your work or like in your life, and like, do you have any desire to almost myth make and like add to the American like history or question of like, what does it mean to be an American or a person and a person with liberty or a person with ideals and values? Like, do you see yourself in that notch, or does that thought not come up like that?
Do you want to be a part of American history, Brad?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't think about that, but it's an interesting question. Yeah. I feel like it's more pertinent to you, maybe.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say I think about this question, but not in the way that you phrased it, but I am interested in it. And the things that interest me about that are maybe like, I like things that approach that sort of pursuit in a way that maybe like similar to what this other guy was asking, maybe like essentializes it. Like I love, like I did with titling a lot in the show, where it's like you have movies like American Pie or American Beauty or American Sniper. Like I like that sort of like title structure as this sort of like very slapstick way to pursue this idea. And like this painting in the front is called American Terrarium. There's another one called American Non-Place. And I like that sort of like naming structure, this kind of like reductive, oversimplified way to pursue that I feel like is meant to be romantic, but is almost flat, I guess. I don't know if that really answers your question. I would say that my goal is not to be like, I'm not thinking about like becoming the great American painter. I think I like the idea of someone thinking that. I'm trying to do that more than me actually doing that, if that makes sense.
I'm trying to be the great American art dealer.
And like maybe manipulating that in like I'm manipulating that like from maybe a meta position, because I mean also with my work it's about looking at the past, so it's maybe more about like the idea of a person who might want to do that, or at least my interest in something like that, than actually being that person. In the same way that like the Milsim stuff is about the people who do it rather than like being that person.
LARPing the Great American Painter.
Yeah, like LARPing, it is a sort of like, it's an interesting question when there's a sort of buffer for it, and you can examine it as a sort of like formal pursuit, I think, for me at least.
I'm going to take one more question, but we'll be here after. We'll be here after, and you can ask whatever you want. So, Shondo, you have a question.
Hey, Ben, it's my first time to your painting. Congrats. I want to ask you a question regarding painting composition color. So I see there is almost like a formal composition where it's like a 3 or 4, almost like evenly distributed with like upper corner or some like edges exposed, and also like very bright, which Matisse is kind of actually interesting. And actually I've never think about it, but like color and the composition choices, like it seems like I already have a very formal language to it, so I want to hear more about that kind of language developing, and also the choice of acrylic at the moment.
Yeah. Well, so the way that I started working on these was I would just take because the model train imagery is taken from catalogs that are basically these exhaustive tomes that are these books that are like that thick, and it's just pictures that all look roughly the same of like a structure with like minor differences between each one, and they're labeled. And it's a sort of like exhaustive compendium of like this idea of place. So you'd have like, so for example, you'd have like a section that's like barns, and it's just like pictures of barns. They're all miniature, and it's like product photography. And I would just take those, when I started working on this project, I would just take those pages, I just take them out of the catalog and begin like painting out certain sections and like buffing out this kind of process of buffing, like erasing, like thinking about thinking about a sort of buff mark, or like creating an image of blankness, like in the context of that, because to me, I thought a lot about why I was interested in those images specifically, and thinking about this sort of like generalness of them, and that they have their own kind of blankness, and that they are depictions of places that are not real or empty, or they populate someone's train layout in their basement.
But it's about the train, not about these objects.
Yeah, they're designed. They're designed to basically take up empty space on someone's model train layout. So they're literally filler. They're not meant to be looked at or examined. And that's a very interesting quality that they had to me. It's a similar concern could be found in this sort of like the liminal space photography of Tumblr or Pinterest, that's kind of examining this kind of like infinitely tessellating suburban hellscape, that becoming a kind of like fetishistic image, which is of interest to me. And so representations of blankness and emptiness, I think, became interesting in the context of the miniatures. And so buff marks and buffing and like fields of color, like I don't know if I can really call it a field of color, but like just the sort of flatness of this was really interesting to me, in conjunction with the imagery and what it means to me and what I was interested in with exploring it. And so thinking about making them formally, I wanted to have a way to include that blankness. And this is essentially what I arrived at over time and making them, and just thinking about reducing them. And actually the most blank of the paintings that I made is
The newest one.
Well, it's not in the show. I mean, it's over at Jake has it, but I'm going to continue producing this work, and I actually want the sort of empty areas to continue and potentially become bigger. And I like that flatness, and also like the way that it makes them feel kind of graphic. Like I like this kind of graphic quality that it has as well as a painting, sort of like flat and graphic. That makes me think of, like, I don't know, I would say like the color palette, which was kind of influenced by like this, like it's kind of like a Lego brick that you would find in a couch, that's a little bit like, it's a primary color, but it's a bit weathered. And I like that kind of color concern in conjunction with this idea of blankness and the miniatures being these kind of toys. And I hope I'm not over-explaining this, but that's kind of how this sort of formal quality came about. I mean, it's also just like being in the studio and trying different things and seeing what works. And I'm going to continue producing these works, and I'm sure that like there will be more formal edits made to the way that they exist. But I guess I just found that it was the easiest way to make them was like this, as far as like my idea and some of these other concerns, having them baked in as effectively as possible.
Can we talk about technical stuff? Like, what did you do first? And then there seems to be different layers. Like, there's an undercoat of yellow, and then under the barn, there's like an overcoat of yellow. And like, what did you say about the photography process?
Oh, well, I mean, I made them in layers.
They're not photographed, they're scans from books.
Scans.
They're scans
What
of your
was
book.
that, the machine that scans a big picture?
No, he scans them and then enlarges them.
Oh, how do you do that?
Just with like know, I have a flatbed scanner, and I put the yearbook in
Can I
there.
borrow it?
Thank you guys so much for coming.